The Bigfoot are being spotted everywhere. UK archaeologists probe unusually large shoes that they are apparently dating back to Roman times. People are claiming to have encountered them in Michigan, Kentucky, Oregon. For the uninitiated, Yeti is the Himalayan version of the Bigfoot. In this episode, we will dive deep into the Yeti. This Yeti, not that. Stay with us as we will talk about not only who the Yeti is, but also what the Yeti does as a cultural entity. We couldn't bring a Yeti to the podcast, but we have with us Professor Shondeep Banerjee of McGill University, an expert on the Yeti, among other Himalayan things, and of world literature, whose upcoming book has a lot to say about the Yeti. But before everything else, we have good old Shubhendu here with us. Shubhendu, a lot of people in the West know the Yeti as the abominable snowman. Why is that? I mean, to me, it seems quite adorable.
The name is the result of a mistranslation that happened back in 1921, the year Charles Howard Berry led an expedition to Mount Everest, the highest peak of the Himalayas and of the planet. Apparently, at 21,000 feet, he found huge footprints, which is local Sherpa attributed to Meto Kangmi, which literally means wild man of the snows. Back in the plains, in Calcutta, journalist Henry Newman, who was writing with the pen name Kim, mistranslated the wild man of the snows as the abominable snowman. These misunderstandings will pile up and turn the Yeti into a great adversary of Doctor Who, where the Yeti, controlled by the Great Intelligence, will attack London.
I think Tintin totally misunderstands the Yeti in Tintin in Tibet, but the Yeti actually turns out to be a helpful friend of Tintin's long lost friend, Chang. Far from being a menacing entity, he's shy and easily scared. He gets frightened when Captain Haddock blows his nose loudly. This characterization is not really out of character, as in Tibetan Buddhism, Yetis are often the ones to assist Buddhist monks and yogis. They protect holy shrines and themselves Buddhist practitioners. Lauren Waddell, who famously encounters Yeti footprints in the misty mountains of Sikkim, attributes these footprints to, and I quote, the trail of the hairy wild men who are believed to live amongst the eternal snows, along with the mythical white lions, unquote, in his book called Among the Himalayas, published in 1899. What Waddell is calling hairy wild men is a near mythical creature made up of the Himalayan myths and Tibetan mysticism that would come to be known as the abominable snowman in Western popular culture, and whose bones and skulls preserved in the monasteries will unfortunately be stolen later, and DNA tests will be conducted on them. With that, let us dive in and let's ask Professor Banerjee about the Yeti's footprints in world literature and culture. So, Professor Banerjee, what got you interested in the Himalayas and particularly in the Yeti?
I am working on the Himalaya for a while now. I've written a few articles and I'm working on a book. And one of the axes of that research has been to look at, say, flora and fauna in the Himalayan region. It started as in the colonial era and it expanded. But this interest in particular the fauna, it took me to Jim Corbett and sort of the big cats to fishing and game hunting. And I had heard and read about the Yeti before, and so that became another kind of line of engagement, and it has been evolving since. So that's really kind of the most immediate reason why I'm interested in the Yeti. But otherwise, other than that, we growing up in Calcutta with a bunch of literary exposures, both in English and Bengali. The Yeti is never very far from your tropical home.
Right.
One grew up with the Yeti in stories of Ghanada, Tenida, Tintin, and so the Yeti was there. So that's how we encountered it, and we always knew of it as the Yeti until we heard that the Europeans had termed it the
Yeah.
abominable snowman.
Yeti was also part of my reading diet, of course, when I was growing up, where the Yeti had epic face-offs with Tintin as well as with Ghanada, Tenida, and Kakababu. But it never was considered abominable, right? You have studied the Himalayas for years and traveled extensively. What do people in the Himalayas think of the Yeti?
My friends who live in the Garhwal and the locals, they have a far more complex relationship with this environment. It's not just about exploit and get rich. And I think this this relationship is, or the Yeti is a very interesting figuration of this relationship because, as you said, in the English, the abominable snowman, the abominable is a bit of a mistranslation, but the snowman, the dweller of the snows, which you see, and it is very much a part of the folk culture of Tibet, Nepal, Bhutan, Sikkim, and
Mm-hmm.
you have a whole bunch of folk tales about the Yeti, where the
Yeah.
Yeti is both uh, is a mountain dweller, is a snow dweller,
Mm-hmm.
is is a kind of mischief maker, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is to be avoided, but is nevertheless very much part of this life. It's a
Right.
bit like to hazard a comparison. The role or the place of the Yeti in Tibet, Nepal, Tibet and Nepali, Bhutanese and Siamese culture is that of, say, the ghosts of Bengali literature,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? They're
Yeah,
good,
I
they're
think that's a
bad,
great
they're
comparison.
there, but they're there. And this is a kind of a way to project, if you will, this kind of
Mm-hmm.
the human into 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 nature, into external nature. Now, of course, this brings us to the question: does the Yeti exist or not? I honestly don't know. I'm agnostic
Mm-hmm.
about it. Maybe it does. So far, we haven't found out anything about whether the Yeti exists or not. But and I'm not here trying to peddle some kind of cryptozoologist thing, but I'm just saying that what for me is more interesting is not whether it exists or it doesn't, but for me, what is more interesting is what it does. Right? What
Right.
is the social function of the
Right.
Yeti, particularly in these narratives?
Right.
So that's kind of how I understand the place of the Yeti.
Mm-hmm.
And if you read the folktales, it's very much a figure of, you either avoid it, sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. And
Mm-hmm.
Tintin in Tibet is, I find, a very interesting album from the Tintin series for a variety of reasons. One is for what I've told you earlier, that
Mm-hmm.
it's not an original thought, but it's a story without villains,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'll come back to that in a second. But if you see Tintin, and
Mm-hmm.
the other is, of course, the kind of human-non-human relationship, not just the interpersonal, inter-human relationship that the story talks about. It also has a very interesting aspect to the human-non-human relationship in Tintin in Tibet. Now, if you see, say the first Tintin comic, Tintin in
Mm-hmm.
Congo, it is profoundly racist.
Yeah.
Tintin goes to Congo. Tintin educates these Congolese children about Belgium and is hunting, is shooting,
Mm-hmm.
and shooting for ivory, shooting for rhino horns. There is no, but this relationship with nature is very, very typical of kind of a Western colonizer, European colonizer.
Mm-hmm.
So it's straight up domination of nature, exploitation
Mm-hmm.
of nature, what have you. By the time you come to Tintin in Tibet,
Mm-hmm.
you see a remarkable transformation. So first, um, it is Tintin going to sort of trying to rescue Chang when others have
Mm-hmm.
given up. You could read it as a kind of white savior mentality, but I think it's a little more than that. That the fact that he
Mm-hmm.
risks his life to go there. So you see a certain transformation of racial relations, or at least racial understanding.
Right.
But the second thing, and this is the no villain part of it, Chang, as you know in the story, is there's a crash. He's the only survivor, and the Yeti takes him
Mm-hmm.
and takes care of him, feeds him
Mm-hmm.
birds, etc. So the Yeti, who's often the abominable
Yeah.
figure in the Western imagination, here is projected as someone who is um, actually someone who takes care of the human. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a very caring relationship. And in fact, the Yeti is quite upset when Tintin rescues
Right.
Chang. And the last scene of the last image
Panel.
of that
Yeah.
scene
Yeah.
panel is absolutely remarkable because you have all these people returning,
Mm-hmm.
and you have the Yeti looking. And
Yes.
before that,
Yes.
also the Yeti is howling because Chang has been taken away. So there's a certain humanization of the
Mm-hmm.
Yeti in this
Mm-hmm.
narrative, but also a s- it kind of re-articulates this kind of human non-human relationship. And the fact that
Mm-hmm.
the Yeti takes care of Chang while a lot of people have given up, a lot of humans
Right.
have given up on Chang, is also quite remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
And this also gives you a sense of what I've been trying to say about no villains. Like everyone is trying to help or at least not interfere in any way. So that's a
Mm-hmm.
very I find that a very interesting projection of the Yeti in
Right.
in um, in popular culture. And the other thing, just to continue on this, that was the other one. I read it as a child. where I learned about the other names of the Yeti, the Yeti
Oh,
and
yes,
the
yes,
Migo.
right,
So
yes,
yeah, so that was quite interesting for me, Tintin opening the doors to a certain
yeah,
kind of Tibetan
yeah.
fascination.
Yeah, and I would just add that in a sense, what how Tintin portrays Yeti is actually closer to how Yeti is portrayed in, as you were saying, a lot of folk tales, which I have not read, but that sounds fascinating. But also in Buddhism, in Tibetan Buddhism.
I have not read these Himalayan folktales that depict Yeti as a regular presence, both friendly and more reticent, but definitely not abominable as the West imagines. But the folktales remind me of some early modern sketches I saw, Mongolian and Chinese, which depict magical apes. On the other hand, a lot of cryptozoologists in the 1970s, the book Abominable Snowman, for example, associates the Yeti with anthropological samples, both prehistoric, Neanderthal, etc., and contemporary people from Africa and Asia. So it is quite fascinating that the Yeti, as a religious figure, a literary figure, and anthropological sample, exists all at once.
We would imagine that, okay, the Yeti is this figure of religion, which then, for some people who are really into the Yeti, they make it a kind of mythical creature, part of
Yeah.
cryptozoology and so on. But actually, maybe the Yeti already was occupying a space which included certain aspects of mythical geography, as well as actual geography and zoology. So it's kind of this figure, this anomaly in the Foucauldian order of things, if you like, which makes it such a powerful figure later.
Yeah, and I mean, we can think of the Yeti with Foucault, we can think of the Yeti with Said, but what you just said, this anomaly, you can also think of him with Derrida to just like go a little theoretical on here. That he's kind of the person who messes with the human, non-human
Mhm,
domains. He's someone who collapses it and has to be kind of
mhm,
left out, ejected to maintain the separation of the human non-human, and this, which is very much, I think, a European imperial project, which is not necessarily, it's again like the ghost in Bengali popular culture, which
mhm,
both of us are familiar with. It's a it's a figuration that actually kind of messes with
mhm,
this kind of strict separation between the human and the non-human, which to a large extent locals are fine with.
mhm,
This distinction, separation of and maintaining the purity of the domains is very much, I think, a colonial project. And this is also true if you think of the geography. So there is the
right.
physical geography of Tibet, and this is true again of any kind of geography that is suffused with an understanding of its sacrality. There's a certain
Mhm,
physical space on which there is a certain mythical or
mhm,
sacral space that is sort of mapped on. Now,
mhm,
if you if you think of Lefebvre, Henri Lefebvre, this production of space, is talking about this kind of uh, lived, perceived, conceived, and lived space. And
mhm,
in some ways, what we're trying to suggest here is that this perceived space, physical space, right, hills, valleys, rocks,
mhm,
stones, is coupled with a mythical space.
The Yeti is perhaps quite lonely in this crossroad of spaces, of dimensions, because it exists in many planes of existence all at once. But we do not. We incessantly need empirical proofs, but those are never quite enough to capture the elusive Yeti. It reminds me of the last panel of Tintin in Tibet, where the lonely Yeti is looking at the trail of travelers, Tintin and his party included, where they are returning from Tibet, leaving the lonely Yeti behind. And that is where we will draw the curtains of the Anti Library podcast today. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel as we return with more stories from the lonely shelves of libraries.